Well, that Iranian response is playing out as we speak, with press reports of over 100 ballistic missiles fired from Iran towards Israel. And I think the context is interesting. It's quite clear that Iran has been extremely reluctant to engage Israel directly, and no small part because, unlike, let's say, some of these movements, it is much as a state and as a regime, it is much more exposed. It has very vulnerable civilian infrastructure, oil facilities, and so on. Um, and the only time that Iran has responded uh, was when it was attacked directly, or at least its facilities in Damascus were directly targeted by Israel in April of this year. I think Iran sees itself and is seen by its coalition partners in the Axis of Resistance as kind of the strategic reserve of that coalition. In other words, it supplies weapons, technology, logistical support, and all the rest of it, but does not conduct all the fighting itself. And the point I think Norm has been making, which has now, I think, been validated, is that Israel has set on a strategy of repeatedly provoking and provoking and provoking its adversary until that adversary is left with no choice but to respond directly, thereby furnishing the pretext for a direct military confrontation. In light of developments in Lebanon in the past week, I think Iran had a dilemma. It could either respond directly and risk a general war in the Middle East, which it clearly does not want, or it could claim that it had full confidence in Hezbollah's ability to defend itself and defend Lebanon and stay on the sidelines, and then risk a considerable loss of credibility. I think what's happened is that Iran has taken a third option, and it's one that many people felt Hezbollah should have adopted as well, which is to recognize that at the end of the day, Israel will stop at nothing to ensure that there is going to be a direct military confrontation, and that it would therefore be in its interest to get ahead of the curve, so to speak, and launch this confrontation at a time of its own choosing rather than at a time of Israel's choosing. I suspect that that is the Iranian calculation we're looking at present.
I want to just say, I know Mouin has to leave. I just wanted to say, look, Nasrallah was a very smart guy. And I will say honestly, I feel the world, I feel the loss. I literally feel the loss of his death. It feels like the world is an emptier place or more vacant place in his absence. He was a very smart guy, and he was also a very informative guy. He's the only leader in the world, literally. He was the only leader in the world, literally, where you could actually learn from his speeches. It was clear he did not have speechwriters. Now, name me another. No, ask yourself. Name me another head of state. All right, Castro didn't have speechwriters, obviously,
Trump?
because but he doesn't deliver speeches. Nasrallah and Chavez obviously didn't have speechwriters because if it were Chavez and Castro, the speechwriters would be working for nonstop 24/7 because they didn't shut up. You know, once, just a funny story, when Chavez was trying to defend, what was his name? The head of state of Iran, uh,
Ahmadinejad.
Ahmadinejad. Chomsky privately in frustration said, "Why can't he just shut up?" He was so frustrated with Chavez for making the situation even worse by coming out supporting Ahmadinejad. In any event, to get back on point, uh, so Nasrallah was a very smart guy. You learned from his speeches. His speeches were deeply insightful. even though the speech has had a double edge, because he's obviously also playing a psychological war with Israel. So there was a certain amount of boasting and a certain amount of ambiguity. So, but in general, so what I quote unquote figured out, I am quite certain he figured out light years ahead of me. The question was, what options did he have? If he stopped, if he let Israel commit its genocide in Gaza, he's completely discredited. If he goes too far, it will bring on a reaction which, quote unquote, the axis of resistance wasn't ready for. They knew that. The most important thing in Nasrallah's last speech was his very frank admission. He said they have the technological edge. And that means now is not the right time. So he tried, as I said, to carve out a middle course, but it wasn't available. There was no middle course. I remember when people were saying to me, I don't think Iran should retaliate because if it retaliates, it's going to create a horror story. And I said, I wish Iran had a choice. And that's when I wrote the article, Samson and Cassandra. That if you look at the Israeli logic in 1967, the Israeli logic in 1982, the Israeli logic in 2008 with Operation Cast Lead, if you look at the logic, they won't stop. They will keep provoking and provoking and provoking until it evokes a reaction. And now Iran knows that. And the question is, what do you do with it? And there isn't, unfortunately, in the real world, there may not be any good choices. So I don't believe that I figured out something that Nasrallah didn't figure out a long time ago. He was the head of Hezbollah for 32 years. And I would say that's not easily replaceable. The most fundamental, I mean, you have to have a fine mind to be a political leader, a real political leader, not Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. But the other quality you need is the wisdom of life experience. That's what Professor Chomsky had. He started politics when he was 9 years old, analyzing the Spanish Civil War. And then he accumulated more knowledge, more experience, more knowledge, more experience. And when you have that knowledge and experience, it could sometimes be deceptive because history doesn't repeat itself. But on the other hand, you can learn a lot from analyzing and having experienced the record that preceded you. And so even as I'm fully confident that there are many competent Arabs, competent Muslims who possess a real technical knowledge, I do think that Nasrallah's loss is significant because they don't have the life experience, those 32 years of analyzing and assimilating and plotting a course. And that's not replaceable in my view. Just as I don't believe in a completely separate, no, I don't believe Professor Chomsky is replaceable. I think his passing will leave a huge void between him and the next person. There is a chasm compounded by an abyss, really. And I believe the same thing with Nasrallah.
I
When I
think the
give
key question is did the movement under his leadership uh, sufficiently construct and develop institutions and an institutional structure so that it can continue to act towards the same objectives or not. And I think that's a question that is very difficult for anyone to answer in this particular moment. And I think the next weeks and months will demonstrate whether he met the ultimate task of leadership, which is to allow the institution he led to continue and to grow in his absence, or whether he placed such a personal imprint on that organization that it cannot survive, or at least cannot remain effective once you remove that particular leader from the movement.
I would say in answer to that question, the historical record is not good. Lenin was succeeded by Stalin. Mandela was succeeded by Jacob Zuma. Chavez was succeeded by Maduro. In each case, the gap between the leader and the successor was huge to the point of a void. So if I were to look at the historical experience, and I can go through it, the second in line, for reasons which perplex me to some extent, second in line have always been very mediocre. The only exception I can think of was Vietnam, where after Ho Chi Minh's death, they actually did develop a collective leadership. If you remember, after Ho Chi Minh, there was no Vietnamese leader. They developed a collective leadership which was able to rise to the occasion and manage the task. China was a complete disaster. Guess Mao didn't think too much about the future after him. So that was also Mao was a catastrophe. So in general, I would say that the historical record is not good on that score. On the other hand, Nasrallah had a deep belief in continuing the struggle, and so maybe, hopefully, he cultivated a next line that was more competent than in other cases.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.